Climate change is our biggest problem. This podcast lays out some of the smartest fixes for climate change. My name is Matt, and this is Climate Solutions. Today, the story of Confucius and the green bonds. When Zilu asked Confucius what his first priority would be if he were entrusted with the government of the state, the master replied, "To rectify names." So the key to good government, Confucius is telling us, is that words should mean the same thing to everyone. Nicola, turn that music off. It sounds like a Chinese restaurant. It's making me hungry.
I can hear your stomach rumbling over the microphone, actually.
It was, but it was louder during our episode on agriculture and food, you've got to admit. That episode, incidentally, all our listeners should check it out. If you subscribe to Climate Solutions, you won't miss an episode, so subscribe. But back to Confucius and rectifying names. When I say to you green bonds, do you know what I mean? Not so long ago, no one knew. But now, big international institutions like the European Investment Bank are figuring out a set of definitions for green bonds and green investments. That's a lot more important than it might sound, because fighting climate change is a lot of things. It's urgent, it's crucial to the survival of humanity, and it's really, really expensive. If we're going to hit our climate targets, we need to invest trillions of dollars, trillions of euros in renewable energy and energy efficiency, in adaptation projects that protect us from the impact climate change is already having, and we need to develop new technologies that none of us have even thought of yet. All this costs a lot of money, and we won't raise that money unless we can demonstrate to investors that it's being spent on climate projects with a real impact. That's what I'm going to tell you about today. Subscribe to the entire series of climate solutions from the European Investment Bank, the EU Climate Bank. Learn what you should do to fight climate change in the oceans, on the road, in your home, and even on your digital devices. Today, we're going to lay out how green financial markets work, because that's where a lot of your investments are going to end up going if you're putting your money into pension funds that are fighting climate change. The last global financial shock a decade ago undermined the credibility of finance and plunged it into a deep crisis of legitimacy. Because the climate is the biggest issue facing humanity today, finance now has to re-establish trust by building confidence in the promises it makes on the green use of capital. If we're to boost support for projects that truly fight climate change and protect the environment, we need to make sure that we develop a common language for green finance. Only then can investors know that they are buying something truly green and understand the impact of their money. The good news is that Europe is moving towards this common language. A new European Union taxonomy, and don't worry, it's nothing to do with tax. I'm talking to you about finance, and that can be pretty boring for lots of people, but it's important. Tax would be just too boring. The tax in taxonomy comes from the Greek word taxis, meaning arrangement. So taxonomy means really the classification of something, how it's arranged. Anyhow, this taxonomy will measure how the things that are financed with a green investment contribute to sustainable objectives. That will create a consistent set of standards for sustainable investment, for example, green loans, green bonds. That's vital to ensuring informed decisions in the market. It's also essential to ensure that competition is fair and effective, so that real value is produced for society. The green and sustainable bond market was started by the European Investment Bank, the EU bank, in 2007. Let's look at that market now.
I'm a bond, a green bond. I've developed over 700 billion in little more than a decade, with exponential growth in the past 5 years. I'm going to grow even faster because of the expansion of loans and other investments that are eligible for allocation from the bonds, the green bonds.
Even without the Sean Connery accent, The greatest challenge is not to find investors willing to buy green bonds. Rather, it's to build understanding and confidence between issuers, that's the banks like the European Investment Bank, that sell the green bonds, and investors like pension funds that buy them.
So what is a bond? A green bond?
I mean, just stop it. I think you should start working on your Daniel Craig impersonation.
I can do Timothy Dalton too. Would you get me a medium dry vodka martini, shaken not stirred? But no one remembers him, does it? So when the European Investment Bank invented green bonds, they were called climate awareness bonds, but we're just going to call them green bonds today because that's how the market is generally known. Green bonds are bonds whose proceeds, the money that's raised from the bonds, have been allocated to renewable energy and energy efficiency projects, green projects. But okay, let's step back and say what a bond is before we get to the green part. A bond is a financial instrument that's sold by a company or an institution or even a country. The investor buys the bond, and the issuer, that's the seller of the bond, agrees to pay back the investor's money plus interest at a set time in the future. Green bonds do all that, the same as other bonds, but with a cool twist. When you buy a green bond, the issuer pledges to use the money to finance a renewable energy or energy efficiency project. After a set period of time, you get your investment back plus interest like a regular bond. You also get information about the kind of investment you've supported, which is increasingly important for pension funds and investors who want to play a role in the fight against climate change. They want to show their shareholders that they are committed to climate action. Let's say you buy a green bond that's going to finance the energy efficiency renovation of some apartment buildings. You, as the investor, should be able to gauge how effective the investment is by accurate reporting of the energy saved and the amount of greenhouse gas emissions avoided as a percentage of the total project cost. So investors used to evaluate their performance based only on financial returns. It now appears more and more important to understand where the money is going, what it's used for, and how its impact is measured. That's why the taxonomy is so important. You don't have to take the word of the guy who sold you the bond that your investment has saved a certain amount of carbon. Issuers describe their strategy and what they actually do in a green bond framework, and they publish reports on where the money went and what its impact was. And there's accredited verification and certification of all this. The latest development in this field is the Sustainability Awareness Bond. What's a Sustainability Awareness Bond? Sustainability Awareness Bonds are financial bonds whose proceeds are allocated to projects that contribute to sustainability objectives beyond climate change mitigation, because that's a green bond. Sustainability awareness bonds deal with other issues related to the environment. So far, there are only a few sustainability awareness bonds, and they were again pioneered by the European Investment Bank. The money raised by the first ones has been used to finance water conservation and pollution prevention and access to water and sanitation and natural disaster risk management in developing countries. In the near future, there will be sustainability awareness bonds that finance health and education projects too. The European Investment Bank issued a €500 million sustainability awareness bond in September 2018. It sold well, and the bank actually had demand for more than €1 billion of the bond, meaning it could have sold the bond twice over. That's a measure of how much investment there is potentially for these green markets. In the autumn of 2019, the bond issue was indeed increased to €1 billion and complemented by a second sustainability awareness bond of 3 billion Swedish krona. You can have projects that are good for the climate and good for sustainability, of course. In those cases, they can be financed by both kinds of bonds. Here's an example. The European Investment Bank's €50 million loan to the Juan Diaz water treatment plant in Panama City was the first project allocated with both sustainability and climate awareness bond proceeds. The sustainability component allocated from sustainability awareness bonds, of course, amounted to €13 million. The climate change mitigation component amounted to €1.5 million euros. The impact behind all that, well, the plant's water treatment capacity will be doubled to 380,000 cubic meters, and it will benefit 450,000 people in Panama City. In 2018, the European Investment Bank allocated 3.2 billion euros of climate awareness bonds proceeds to 76 projects in 29 countries. The EU Bank invested proceeds from selling its sustainability awareness bonds in 15 projects in 12 countries. Now that there's clarity about what green is, the market can go beyond the kind of bonds that have been issued so far. Every market is based around risk. Most investors think a bank like the European Investment Bank is a pretty safe bet. It's not risky. It's backed, after all, by the 28 EU member states, and rating agencies give it a AAA rating. But that means you don't get paid a very high rate of interest in return for the small risk you've taken. So there should be green investments that are riskier because some investors will want a higher return. The European Investment Bank is promoting that market too. The bank is investing up to 60 million euros in a fund managed by Amundi, the largest asset manager in Europe. And that fund will buy high-yield green bonds, green loans, and green securitized credit. Because the EU Bank will encourage other investors to join in, Amundi's Green Credit Continuum program will provide up to 1 billion euros to finance green investments in the EU. Oh, Nicola, you brought back the Chinese music.
It's time for lunch. Let's wrap this up.
Well, Confucius and I promised to define some terms, and I hope you've got a better grasp of what the green finance market is all about and what direction it's taking. That's our episode. For the research, I want to thank Aldo Romani, Head of Sustainability Funding at the European Investment Bank. Subscribe to Climate Solutions, and you'll learn what you should do to fight climate change in the oceans, on the road, in your home, and even on your digital devices. I'll be back with Nicola, the climate Croat,
Bye-bye.
next time on Climate Solutions from the European Investment Bank, the EU Climate Bank.